record. And I would like to introduce our program tonight. The title is Current Status of the Endangered Island Marble Butterfly. This will be a tag team presentation by Sarah Hanson and Walt Andrews. Sarah is the executive director of the land trust on sacred ground that is home to the island marble butterfly. She has worked in conservation and land stewardship for 25 years. She has a BS in Geology and Geophysics from Western Washington University. She moonlights as a healer, writer, sailor, tinkerer, and she has studied indigenous healing with the Cuero tribe in the high Andes of Peru. She calls San Juan Island home since 2001, practically a native, and we're very glad to have you tonight, Sarah. Walt has also worked on conservation issues in his career as an ecologist. He has worked with the federal, state, and local land managers on reptiles, fish, and birds, and he is now the coordinator for the On Sacred Ground Land Trust with the goal of creating and maintaining habitat with the volunteer program. He also works at the WSU San Juan County Extension Service as a research assistant, and he is enjoying exploring the mountains and islands of the beautiful Salish Sea. So thank you both for being with us tonight. And Sarah, do you want to go ahead and kick off for the first part of the talk?
Sure, and I apologize, I'm in the dark. I told a few folks when I hopped on, my internet's a little slow these days, so I'm actually in our library parking lot, but luckily you'll mostly be looking at my slideshow. So I will share my screen if we're ready for that.
Kitty.
You'll see my kitty first. And I also see we have some pretty seasoned experts in the house, so they may recognize some of their own slides. Let's see here. But I'm here to give you the best current status of the island marble butterfly that I am capable of, and I definitely invite anyone in who knows better. I don't come from the science and research background. I'm more of the boots on the ground project management type. So you'll learn a little bit more about me, but I'll tell you why I'm involved and give you some history and overview for the folks that don't know about island marble, some of the basics, and talk a little bit more about On Sacred Ground, what we're doing, why we're involved, and where we're hoping to head with recovery. And then I'm going to pass it over to Walt, who is our volunteer program coordinator. So this background sketch that you see is the mock-up sketch by Pacific Northwest artist Jill Bliss. And if you aren't familiar with her, look her up. She's at jillbliss.com, and she's well known for her mushroom medleys. She's a nature artist essentially, and she's pretty incredible, and you'll see the finished product in Walt's slides, but she does a really great job at capturing more than just the animal itself. Let's say she gives the habitat sometimes sort of overlays, you know, what all is going on in a specific species or in the mushroom world. And so we were honored when she agreed to do a commission piece for us, basically. And I love this picture because it kind of reminds me of this blueprint that we're all making together for, you know, island marble recovery in particular, as well as, you know, so many of our species right now that are in peril. So who am I? My name is Sarah Hanson, like Paulette said, and thank you again for all of you for attending and for Washington Butterfly Association for having us. My background is primarily environmental education, and through multiple conservation corps groups or trail associations. So, you know, for 20 years, I've partnered with Conservation Corps, Land Trust, National Park Public Lands, that world of resource management. But the spectrum of projects that I've been involved in, it's mostly had nothing to do with endangered species. It was, you know, the support work on the ground to build the trail or do the studies for plants or talk to visitors and do surveys or cut down trees, even, you know, all sorts of random broad variety of detail work to go into making the management plan happen. So I did that work primarily in the West Coast, Alaska, Washington, Oregon, California, Utah, Arizona, and a little bit in the Southeast. And then when I moved back full time to San Juan Island, after being kind of on and off the island, I took over the first program director position with the San Juan Island Conservation Corps. So this is a picture of me and a couple of the kids and one of our land bank partners working on a trail project. And later I founded On Sacred Ground, but you know, where we really started with the Youth Conservation Corps is in the national park here and the land bank primarily. So that's where I became involved in island marble butterfly work. And this slide is showing some of our younger kids. We had primarily middle school youth that would go out and spend 4 hours working on a project and then a couple hours in the afternoon after lunch learning about something either related to the project that we had just worked on or another interesting environmental ed topic. It's hard to keep 12 and 13-year-olds motivated for 6 hours, but they would do things like collect seed for prairie plants. And this picture shows them working in the nursery that's down below the island marble butterfly captive rearing shed at American Camp up here on the south end of San Juan Island. And they directly supported the island marble butterfly work by helping to build this prairie nursery and all of its infrastructure by collecting native seed, by doing the plantings on the prairie, sometimes even mapping and removing invasive species before native plantings happen, even going into ground disturbance for brassica, one of the host plants for island marble, which Gerald Weaver, if folks remember him, one of the former national park employees up here, who is the resource management director for the park, was out here doing a lot of experimentation. And so he had our kids using tools sometimes to disturb the soil for brassica, sometimes just using hands, like we were trying, you know, all the methods to see what works. It was kind of fun to just do the work sometimes and not be involved in the decisions. And now I'm a little bit more involved in the decisions and helping to mobilize the work getting done. So it's been an interesting process. The youth crews and sometimes the adult volunteers and adult crews that would come to the island would also do things like put up and take down fences around habitat plots. Oop, hold on here. Adjust my Zoom bar so I can get back to my arrow on this slideshow. There we go. So this photo is from the captive rearing lab in its earlier days. I also helped Jenny Schrum as a national park seasonal hire for 60 days. They needed some emergency help, so I did that while I was doing Conservation Corps work. And so it gives you an idea of behind the scenes captive rearing. We've got instars, the caterpillars, the larvae going through their growth stages in Tupperwares with mesh screens glued around the top, and they're being fed sprigs of mustard or brassica rapa and monitored each day for all sorts of different things, how big they are, what stage of an instar they're actually in, whether they're dying or living, and the overall amount of time it takes for them to set up in a chrysalis state. So that was also a pretty cool experience to find myself kind of thrown into and really understand from behind the scenes that there are sometimes just a few people involved in keeping a species alive. So, you know, kudos to a lot of the scientists and the folks that are still involved in these incredible networking moments of collaborative efforts to look at something as big as managing an endangered species and what they need. You know, what habitat needs do they have? What do we know about them? How are they changing? So quick background on island marble butterfly and a little overview, and Amy Lambert might recognize this slide. It's from a UW symposium that I pulled off the internet as I go through my gamut of researchers that have already provided this background work and groundwork to set the tone for island marble. Its scientific name, Euchloeopsinides insulanus. It's a subspecies of large marble, so much bigger territory. And as far as I know, you know, not very much is known for the island marble butterfly's historic range, other than the locations that it was found in the later 19th century and the specimens collected for museums. So the known locations being in southern Vancouver Island and Gulf Islands, that, you know, the actual range and territory over thousands of years, or however long it took for the island marble to evolve into the species we see today, it might have been entirely different, of course, from what we know. But as far as I know, you know, we know very little about it and whether it was further north and moving south. And now we're seeing that it's, you know, it's continuing to move south, and how much weather and climate cycles over time might be playing into that. So the species was thought to be extinct in 1908, and I don't know what the earlier or earliest discoveries might have been, if you consider, you know, the real settlement for European colonization in Western Washington and Southern Vancouver, the Cascades. That's all happening in 1840s, 50s, 60s gold rush time. And so we have oral documentation of species with the indigenous folks up to that point. And then before 1908, there's not a lot of time going into the record keeping and the documentation of these species. In 1998, 90 years later, and a group of scientists were doing a more routine butterfly survey, not looking for island marble, but a broad butterfly survey at American Camp in San Juan Island National Historical Park, and rediscover what had been previously concluded to be an extinct species. And so again, you know, it reminds me of the importance of citizen scientists and curious observers and naturalists that are constantly contributing to our knowledge base as species evolve, as they move, as they change, and just understanding and knowing, you know, a species intimately. What does it eat? What movies does it like to watch? You know, we don't know those kinds of details the way that the indigenous people might have, because their survival depended on it. So after 1998 and that rediscovery of island marble, you know, then we're working toward not only the science and data research collection, but we're working toward the getting it listed. And so 2002 groups, the Xerces Society, Northwest Ecosystem Alliance, Friends of the San Juans, Center for Biological Diversity, they file the first petition to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to get it listed. And it took 22 years, 18 years since that petition was filed, but 22 years from rediscovery to 2020, when island marble butterfly is finally listed as an endangered species. So another photo and slide from Dr. Amy Lambert's UW Symposium slideshow. This shows the habitat that's primary now. And during that time frame, 1998 to 2020, there were multiple locations, what's called core occurrence complexes on San Juan Island and Lopez, where island marble was found. So it wasn't just one site, it was usually a cluster of sites in multiple kind of key locations. And that started to shrink. And now this is on the southern end of San Juan. This is the primary place where island marbles are found. And they like 3 host plants pretty much. They, they don't have a broad food palette. And 2 of those host plants are introduced or non-native species. So they somehow have adapted and evolved to the likely introduced plants that the European colonizers brought with their farming methods and kind of transference of farming methods from fields and overlaid that on what had been coastal prairie habitat. So, whoops, let me go back here. Island marbles were found on Lopez in the mid 2000s, 2005, I want to say as one of the key years. And we've got the species being listed in 2020, so we're only almost 3 years into that. And since we started captive rearing, which I believe was in 2012, that primary burden for the core habitat as well as the rearing has been on San Juan Island National Historical Parks, their full title, their shoulders. Some of the unique attributes of island marble that make it an interesting species to work with in terms of its recovery is it's in its chrysalis for 10 to 12 months. That's a really long time for, a do not disturb sign on your hotel room, so to speak. You have to make sure that you can stay alive in that chrysalis through almost 4 seasons without getting eaten and so on. And, it's an egg and an instar for 6 weeks, an adult butterfly for 6 to 9 days. It doesn't have a lot of activity time. It's primarily sleeping, it's dreaming, it's hibernating. And that makes sense if you're an islander up here. We had longer winters. Our tourist season is now quite a bit longer. So I feel myself not getting quite as much hibernation as I would like and being disturbed a little bit more and feeling like my chrysalis phase is being munched on by deer and so on. So I can relate. But the island marble, it's kind of in that sense, it's like a high maintenance or an expensive date. It's got a lot of needs that need human intervention to really help boost it up, or we are going to lose it. And the island marble recovery plan with U.S. Fish and Wildlife is around 25 million, I believe, over 25 to 30 years. So humans are vital, volunteers are vital to going into essentially establishing suitable habitat as one of our first initial major needs and accomplishments in order to provide the protected space, the undisturbed space that this butterfly needs to be able to roam around a bit more freely. Some of the other contributing factors to island marble conservation on the big picture too, that play a role in how we make these decisions and so on. As I'm sure some of you know, the ecosystem, coastal and west side prairies and sometimes scary oak habitat, those host ecosystems for a lot of these imperial species, they're also disappearing. So we have a threatened ecosystem. No wonder the species that it's hosting can't really survive. And WWO estimates around 3% of those original prairies remain that were first established after the ice sheet retreated from Washington, Oregon, British Columbia. the associated human species, the tribal diaspora of the Coast Salish, that created their lifeways around the migrating resource gathering camps on the prairie, as well as the forests too, or the year-round settlements. You know, their survival relationships were much more intimately in tune with what was going on, because they needed to eat the food, they needed to use the plants as medicine, and so on. So, you know, they may have witnessed island marble as well as many other species and had some relationship or story to go along with each of those species. I have yet to hear of any known relationships with island marble from Coast Salish. And I have asked around a little bit, but you know, on a big scale, they were doing prescribed burns, managing for game, actually farming some of the starchy bulbs in companion planting guilds. And as that settlement happened, the colonization, the knowledge of that way of life, those cultural lifeways, was dismissed, and that ecosystem and the species that is in association started to shrink. So we're at a point of understanding all of those relationships much better and starting to work backwards in time a little bit. So some of the biggest threats to island marble survival, as well as they are known, although they, in terms of order, they may be a little bit different now. And again, an A.B. Lambert slide that I believe is a study in mid-2000s. So predation, insects, birds, and snails, and so on. Starvation, so we have potentially lack of host plants available, and hungry deer come along and munch on soft succulent flowers that might be hosting an egg or chrysalis. Human disturbance, residential development, and climate change factors, which I would like to know more about personally, because it seems to be getting more and more intense for the climate change factors. And an example of that would be from this study, you know, looking at the location of one of the native host plants, peppergrass, lepidium. There could be storm surges that are coming up, moving logs around, affecting the plants in the lagoons, on the beaches, in the dunes. And that, you know, of course, is contributing to how species naturally need to adapt and adjust based on Mother Nature's influence of the natural environment without humans even playing a role. So about On Sacred Ground, what are we doing with Island Marble Butterfly? We are a nonprofit that works with environmental stewardship in terms of projects and programs. What we like to do is come through a window of permaculture ethics, which are care of earth, care of people, and fair share, as well as that 7 generations ahead type of mentality for how we approach our projects, and you know, using that as an evaluation tool essentially, as well as a guide for what activities we take on. So we like to work in social, ecological, racial, financial justice intersections, and sometimes up the bar in environmental stewardship work that's usual and typical, but we look for ways to engage more diverse audiences, make fundamental changes to anything really, if it's stewardship or if it's science and research. Look for places where we're missing pieces of information. What can be done? Where can we go? Because nobody's doing it yet. So we have worked with Coast Salish tribes and indigenous people, primarily more in marine and environmental education, the canoe culture, and becoming involved in that. I would like to work more with tribes within prairie restoration. That's still coming online, and that's a partnership and multifaceted kind of approach with many agencies and organizations. But generally, you know, we like to come from ecocentric, deep ecology type places where we're valuing humans, animals, plants for their inherent nature and value, and not necessarily for what they provide to humans or what need they meet for humans. Although pollinators in general, provide so many of everything that the planet needs. So we understand that relationship as well. We do build pollinator and permaculture gardens, or we endeavor to do that. We have some folks that we're working with right now on a small scale to implement those gardens. And then we sort of landed in island marble butterfly world a little bit more seriously in 2020 with the cooperative agreement to run the rearing lab under Jenny Schrum. And this is Jenny releasing an adult butterfly in the dunes. So after we started that captive rearing work in 2020, using the baseline population estimates that were, I believe, conducted initially by Merrill Peterson around 2008. I've heard multiple number ranges, but somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 to 500 annually. So not a ton. And Jenny Schrum being able to focus completely on captive rearing instead of where prior to this cooperative agreement, she had been working for the national park, and her position with the park was half and half. We'll say captive rearing, and half of her time went to other projects within the park. She's now able to focus completely on captive rearing, and that annual egg collection and adult butterfly releases seem to remain steady at around 125 for 10 years or so, or a little bit less than 10 years. And then Jenny, in a couple years of running the rearing lab, doubled the numbers. So that was very encouraging. However, the concern around suitable habitat and having enough habitat to allow for the higher numbers in terms of population and releases started to contribute to multiple conversations around like how well are we matching up that tandem essentially. And this slide is one of Jenny's slides from the rearing lab. So after the larvae set up in their chrysalis on shish kebab skewers, and they hang out in the lab for 10 to 12 months. When they eclose or emerge, they come out and they look sometimes crumpled up like they've slept badly. And it takes them a little bit to unfold and look, like a normal butterfly. And then they'll take them out and release them into suitable habitat plots. So we stopped being the captive rearing lead as of last spring, and that rearing responsibility went back to the national park, although that may change again next year. So we'll submit this year for a cooperative agreement again. And we've been working with the national park up here to look at how best to approach sharing the load with them and to expand the rearing facilities. So there has been just one, and that may not be the greatest idea because it's all your eggs in one basket, literally and figuratively. But it's also a matter of reaching the goals on the recovery plan. So it's on the list of goals, the to-do list, to have more rearing facilities. Jenny has been working on scoping for options for what the best captive rearing facility setup might look like, everything from a mobile van to a high-tech temperature controlled building to a quick 2x4 lean-to with a mesh screen and a roof. And that's kind of where we're leaning at this point, is the quick 2x4 mesh screen to mimic conditions in the wild a little bit more. But that study, that cooperative agreement isn't done yet. And so that will also contribute to the knowledge pool for what decisions are made going forward with all the interested parties and stakeholders. And then we submitted a proposal to build this volunteer program that Walt is now in charge of. And, you know, he'll share quite a bit more about where that's going. I'll give you a lot more detail about island marble and what is contributing to, you know, how we need to plug volunteers in. So we've got all sorts of interesting projects that could potentially happen, and we're full of ideas and open doors. And it's been pretty cool to be behind the scenes in a way that feels like we're helping, you know, actually make progress toward hitting these recovery goals and playing with, you know, some pretty amazing people that understand this world from all angles. We've got federal government folks and local folks and map makers and amazing researchers and contributors like Amy Lambert and so on that are making it so that we're not going to hopefully lose species just based on some of the human factors that have contributed toward species loss. So here's a little bit of contact information for you about me, and that's about where I close on my side of things, and I can take questions now. I think Paulette said we were going to split it in half or pass it off to Walt, however you would like to work it. But thank you again, everyone, for being here and listening, and your participation even in this group and organization. It's great to have allies and partners who are going to help spread the word. And, you know, we keep the pollinators, we keep the plants, and we keep the ecosystems. I think we all know that. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Would you mind putting your contact information in the chat function? Is that possible
Sure.
for you to do?
Yep.
So that people can follow up, snatch it and follow up if possible. There was a question about snail predation, and I think that was answered by Walt. It was basically how do snails affect the island marble butterfly, and Regina Johnson suggested that the snails were eating the plants that had eggs on them and were also ingesting the eggs, and then Walt chimed in with the name of the species. So I think we got that squared away. I was wondering about during the 20 years that the petition was pending to list the island marble butterfly, was the reduction in the numbers of habitats, was that just a result of fewer host plants, habitat loss through farming or development, or do you know the answer to that?
I don't know the answer to that scientifically and with data off the top of my head. It's a really good question. What I've heard in terms of talking with partners and maybe through some of the research that I've read through and what I know of, you know, one of the stories that Eliza Habiger shared with me, who's a land bank employee, was when she did initial surveys on Lopez Island and found host plants in non-suitable locations. It was because like Brassica rapa was along a roadway corridor. And so it might have been subject to pesticide spraying or cars running off the road. And I think some of the decisions were made to pull the brassica and ensure that island marble is not flying in and laying eggs there. And then we end up losing the species because we've created that habitat and the plant isn't going to actually live very long. On San Juan, there's farming activities. There has been a fair bit of residential expansion and development in the last 20 years, even just since I've been here, to like small clusters of houses. There, I believe, is still a decent amount of probably lawn control with herbicides and pesticides, but I don't know that we have the data that we really could pinpoint this in a more exacting way. Yeah.
Yeah, the things you suggest are good places to look, but you just don't know the answer for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you for putting your contact information in the chat. Let's see. Regina asked about deer herbivory. And I know that Walt's going to talk a little bit more about that. So maybe leave that for him. And another question about the snails. Let's see, could land-loving austinides intermix with the Enceladus and ruin the project?
Oh, that was John Bauman.
I don't know how to answer that question. There's words in there I don't know what they mean.
Can I answer? Can I answer that?
That seems like a butterfly expert question.
Go ahead, John.
Well, if they were going to do that, they'd have to fly over the Cascades to do it because that's the nearest population. So, so if they, if such a thing happens, it'll be remarkable one way or the other. It'll be unfortunate for the island marble, maybe, but no, it ain't happening.
Okay. Well, Walt, do you want to go ahead and share your screen and continue with your part of the presentation?
Yes, let's do that.
Be on mute.
Okay, let me share my screen here. First of all, thank you all for having us. I really appreciate getting to spend the evening with you. It's a treat. In good company for sure. Like Sarah mentioned, I'm the volunteer program coordinator for the Island Marble Butterfly program, and I've got some slides for you about the current status of things, and also I'll have a lot of information here about the volunteer program itself. So a little about me. I am an ecologist with a background in plants and plant-animal interactions. So I haven't worked with butterflies before, but so I've got a lot to learn from you all, but I am learning a lot as I go along here. My background is in research. I've worked with cottonwoods. I've done a fair amount of field work, from working in deserts to spruce forest tops on the East Coast to streams around the Puget Sound. So I've worked in a lot of different systems. I've got also, background in land management, different projects. But these days I'm coordinating the volunteer program, and also work at WSU San Juan County Extension doing research there. And I just started with the Conservation District in the Islands as a project manager to add habitat for the butterfly. I'm going to talk about development of the program, of the volunteer program tonight, and also about the recovery efforts going on. This is an image of that Jenny Schrum took that is of American camps. This is on San Juan Island, and this is the core habitat of the island marble butterfly. Here's a patch of host plants that was a National Park Service.
So Walt, we can't
yes.
see the screen.
You can't see my screen? Oh, shoot. Oh, thanks for stopping me. Yeah. Sorry. Sorry about that. Thanks for stopping me. So
No problem, we're good.
I'll go back just a little bit. There, that works better. Thanks. So this is the first slide where I'm talking about the butterfly program, and I can go forward to here where we have an image of what's called the critical habitat, which is 812 acres that was designated at the time that the island marble was listed. So in this photo, we're looking east towards Cattle Point, and so we're looking directly at where the remaining butterflies live. There's one location, which I'll talk about later, where they have expanded into, but this is the critical habitat here. I'm going to talk a lot about habitat today and where the current stage of recovery is. I'm going to talk about the program and how we're supporting recovery goals. I think one thing to keep in mind here is that, we have parallel topics here with the volunteer program, and we're doing a lot of work with a lot of different groups in the islands, from federal to individual landowners. And so what you're going to see today is a pretty good snapshot of how we're working to expand habitat beyond the national park boundaries. So most of what I'm going to talk about is about habitat, and it's going to be beyond the national park lands. Our background is, like I said, in plants, so a lot of this is going to be focused on what's necessary for the butterfly to complete its life cycle. These are the partners that are working on recovery. You can see everyone from U.S. Fish and Wildlife to San Juan Preservation Trust. This is a pretty good representation of who's working on adding habitat. We're working on public and private land. So, this will be the 50th anniversary of the Endangered Species Act this year. The federal agencies have an obligation to uphold that act and follow through with it. The private landowners and state groups are voluntary. We work with pretty much anyone who is adding habitat. Down here at the bottom of the slide, you can see there are two programs that are U.S. Fish and Wildlife programs that we do work to support. So there's the Candidate Conservation Agreements with Assurances program, which is often referred to as the CCAA program. And there's the Partners for Fish and Wildlife program. They're similar in a number of regards. The primary difference here is that CCAA members were able to establish habitat before the ESA listing as endangered, and then after that, then the Partners program picked up things. The volunteer program started, this isn't an entirely new thing for people to be volunteering for the island marble, but there's been momentum that's been built towards just finding new ways to engage volunteers beyond single organizations. So we're the only organization that is solely dedicated to volunteers. There's a lot of different organizations, like San Juan Preservation Trust is a really good one to point out, because they do a lot of work that I'll show as we go along here. But there are also YCCs. These are youth conservation corps that have done other previous work. And so now we're sort of integrating that with a broader focus on just getting people into plots to help with habitat, to add habitat. This organization, the volunteer program, was made possible through a cooperative agreement that was established between U.S. Fish and Wildlife and On Sacred Ground. We started last year, so we're a new program. A lot of what I'm going to talk about on the program side of things is it's about development. We're still getting going. Sarah did the groundwork to find funding for my position, and from that time on, I've been focused on developing the program. What is the Island Marble Butterfly Program? Well, like I described earlier with the photo of all the different partners that we have, we're very much integrated into the work that these groups are doing. And so if there's something that needs doing, we are finding ways that we can get volunteers to help with a wide range of activities to support the recovery. A lot of what I'm going to talk about today is work that is really fairly simple in some regards. It's basically gardening. We're gardening for butterflies here, and we're growing a weed, which is kind of a funny thing to do, but in this case, it makes a lot of sense. So we're working at a lot of different scales here, from patch size on up to the scale of the distribution of the butterfly. Fairly small area, but that's what we're doing. There are a lot of different needs. So in terms of coordinating this program, it means, we're fitting things together on an annual time scale. It could be that we're doing work that some people might be establishing plots, building fencing and that kind of thing. This is where the youth conservation corps might come in. Or it could be removing thistles from the prairie, invasive species removal, that kind of thing. We have, other activities that are just they're more seasonal, and then some that are very, they're only occasional activities that we might do, like collecting seeds to grow out for more seeds, seed production, that kind of thing. And this is probably going to change too as we go along, because there's going to be different stages of recovery. And so right now we're really just trying to get a lot of habitat out onto the landscape. And I'll start to show some maps in just a moment. To get habitat out on the landscape, we're really focused on supporting the draft recovery of the island marble butterfly, which hasn't been finalized yet into a plan, but that is coming soon. Now, our program has 3 core tenets. One is habitat conservation, another one is citizen science, and another one is communications. This communications aspect to what we do is focused on providing up-to-date information. It's focused on giving information to volunteers about events that they can attend, and it's also used to be able to share information among partners. Well, a lot of what we're doing here is working on host plants and getting those established. And this is what's going to drive a lot of the current stage of this is what drives a lot of the current stage of habitat additions. So this just shows a little bit about establishing the program, and I'll get into some slides that are a little more focused on some maps and deer herbivory and that kind of thing. But basically, we're just developing things, and then we'll dial in our specific activities better. This is a map of the critical habitat that was established, 812 acres, that was established 2 years ago when the island marble was listed. And since that time, there's only one area, Fraser Homestead Preserve, which it's owned by San Juan County Land Bank, and the San Juan Preservation Trust maintains it. It's about a mile down the road from American Camp. And there have been just a few individuals that have been, few larvae eggs and larvae that have been detected at that location. But that's the only place that people have seen new occupancies. So this is 2019 when these eggs and larvae were first seen. And I think that Kathleen has observed IMBs 3 out of 4 years since that time. 1 year was during the pandemic, and I don't think she was able to, kind of messed up her sampling effort, but at any rate, that's the only location where they are outside of the critical habitat. This slide represents what a habitat expansion might look like, and we can kind of hold on to this as I go forward, because I'm going to show what it used to look like. This map, which is in the draft species biological report, shows what distribution looked like 16 to 18 years ago. So during 2005, 2007, we had a number of small populations that were scattered throughout the islands. But about 5 or 6 years after that, this distribution collapsed down to only at American Camp and the Cattle Point area there, which is represented by the cluster at the very bottom of the map. Again, this is the photo I showed earlier, but this gives us an idea. It's looking across that clustered, that group of of patches that are down at the very bottom of that last slide. And this is looking forward. So this is an image that is, it's looking north. And if you could kind of look behind you and to the right, you would see where Fraser Homestead Preserve is. So in the next several years, we're really looking at expanding in this direction, which presents some challenges. The butterflies, no one knows, I don't think, no one knows how the butterflies got from American Camp to Fraser Homestead. They either flew through the woods along the road, or they came up the coast. But these are some of the challenges that we face. We're looking here. If you look out to the north there's kind of a barren area, and that was actually a location we were talking about brown snails earlier, and that's a location where they did impact host plants some time ago. This is just a map. This is the hypothetical slide that just gives some idea of what it could look like if we are successful in recovery. So the criteria are that you can have I think it's four of these core occurrence complexes would allow us to say, okay, well, the island marble is no longer endangered. It's on the threatened list. And then to get to the point where we can say that no longer is the island marble threatened, then that would take 5 new not populations, but 5 new core occurrence complexes. And it could look like something like this. 2 would have to be on Lopez based on the draft statement. Wait a second. Okay, sorry, it skipped around me. So here is,
I'm afraid.
Here's an image of a plot with Brassica rapa with field mustard in it. And this gives you some idea of what some of this expanded habitat looks like. And so, like I said, there's a lot of gardening involved. And this is one of those plots. The deer fence there is to protect against deer browsing on the ends of the plants where the eggs and early larvae, early instars will be located. And so that gives some protection against at least a portion of the loss of eggs and larvae. There's also a buffer zone that's designed into these plots. So you can see there's a distance from the host plants over to the fence, and that provides enough room usually to account for any pupa that might be out there for most of the year. They'll wander off the host plant. These are just some slides that give you some idea of the work that's being done now to support the host plants throughout the year. There are usually 2 plantings that are done. So there's a spring and a fall and a spring planting. And the idea is, I'll talk a little bit about this in a few moments, but in a few minutes. But the idea is that you can provide a host plant for those first butterflies that show up, those first adults, and then have enough host plants out there so that the later emerging butterflies have something to eat as well. And so there can be eggs and larvae that can survive on those plants. This is just a slide of some students that are from Seattle. This is Seattle Waldorf School this past year, and they are adding soil. So you would think this field mustard is easy to grow. It just grows in fill piles on the side of the road. You go to a parking lot and there it is in the corner of the parking lot somewhere. But it turns out if you want to grow this in some of these locations that you've been wanting to plant it, then it's actually harder than you think, because some are really wet or They're just different challenges that prevent the host plant from growing well. Okay, this slide just shows the life history of the butterfly and points out that I want to focus here on the incidental predation, so the deer that can eat the eggs and larvae, the young larvae, and then just again emphasize that we have pupa that are in the grass or vegetation for something like 11 months out of the year. Here's some photos of life stages that some of these the national park took, and Jenny Schramm took some of them. And then this is one of Amy's graphs from dissertation. I just wanted to point out here, I like this graph because it just shows how few instars make it to the pupa life stage. And so, we're not going to protect all the eggs and larvae in these deer fence areas from natural predators, but at least, something can be done to account for some of that incidental predation. These are, this is another photo of a habitat plot that's very near the American camp location. So gives you some idea of what is around. Some of these will be planted on one side or in half of the plot, and then they'll be disturbed again the following year on the other side. And so if there were eggs or larvae on one side, you don't have to go in and disturb that same side to be able to get the host plants that you want for the next year. Here's planting seed at Fraser. There's another photo coming up of Fraser Homestead Preserve, but this is that location where there have been eggs and larvae outside of the critical habitat. And here are just a few photos of the host plants to give some idea of the introduced host plants on the left, and then the native host plant, the Lepidium virginicum, on the right. Which it's kind of interesting too that this supports subspecies of mustard, and so you have a subspecies interaction. Another photo here of plot disturbance, and this just sort of highlights. This is work that's being done by the conservation district. This is involved with this site. Eco Studies Institute in Olympia is involved with this site, and so this is on Lopez. This is an instance where habitat is being expanded. This is the stage that we're at, where you see these fenced areas. This is what's outside of the critical habitat. This is a good photo of Fraser. So this is what you might see if you were at Fraser, where there was the habitat expansion, or the new island marbles that were found there. And this is something that we'll be doing as well as monitoring. So a lot of the volunteer work is about maintaining habitat, and then we'll get into some monitoring before too long. Looking at host plant numbers, phenology, counting eggs and larvae and adults, that kind of thing. We'll also get into some habitat mapping. And that could be for historical habitat. The new habitat doesn't have to be the same as the old habitat, but if you just even look at these satellite images, you can see that the open habitat in the center of these islands is pretty decent habitat compared, obviously, to forests. What might we do when you all are here? Well, we could do some plot maintenance. We could do some weeding or that kind of thing for host plants. We could potentially do some monitoring and potentially some habitat mapping. Some of these activities we're still figuring out, well, where are we at in terms of what the volunteers should be doing. And so we're developing what are approved activities, but we're well on our way to getting those going. And then we also do outreach and education, to grow the volunteer base, increase program visibility, increase the number of partners. We have different events, and then also some of this outreach will even result in new habitat plots, which happened in the fall. We wrote a press release and somebody heard about it, and so we're getting more habitat that way as well. And then finally, the last thing I'll talk about just briefly again is, like Sarah did, is climate change. And here's a photo of Lepidium, the natural host plant that is in lagoons and shoreline habitats. And there are some things we can do in terms of, like I was mentioning before, planting host plants in the spring and the fall to make sure, the introduced ones, to make sure that there's a consistent habitat available. Also educating about this sort of habitat is good. This is the kind of beach habitat sometimes that people will walk down into and not really know what they're, know that they're in island marble habitat when they're walking out to the beach. This is just a slide to point out that we have, challenges with that synchrony issue with host plants. So sometimes you can have a mismatch if it's, it could be maybe a cold year or something. If you didn't have plants there, then it could be that you just don't have enough suitable habitat. But otherwise, if for some reason there were eggs or larvae that were on plants that really just weren't tender, or they weren't good habitat, then you could miss some of the season that way too. And then finally, just pointing out the aspects of stormwater inundation. We're going to have more frequent storms. That's expected. It's expected we'll have more frequent storms. And there was a situation in, I think it was 2005 or 2006, where storms. There've been a couple instances, basically, in the past few years, the past 15 years, when stormwater has intruded and destroyed habitat. Also sea level rise. These are very low-lying areas, so it just makes this habitat all the more important and precious. So with that, I'll just show you a few nectar sources that are available, just to get an idea. This white plant, you may be familiar with it. The field chickweed is important for reproduction. It's a mating site for the butterfly. And with that, if you have any questions, happy to answer questions. And thank you all very much. Looking forward to you being here. I have some resources as well. I can go to that slide. Oh, there we go. These are several resources if you want to look up more species information. There's an ECOS site for U.S. Fish and Wildlife. There's also a WDFW site. San Juan Preservation Trust site is good. She has some, Kathleen and San Juan Preservation Trust has some good information there. And also Nature Explorer is a good resource. Here's my email. I can go ahead and put it in the chat. And I'll stop sharing unless you'd like to see that slide again. Look at the chat a little bit. Okay, let's see. There are differences in, I'm just looking at, and I can't speak to this very well, but looks like B. Newhouse, you're asking if adult vigor is any different between larvae feeding on one of the 3 host plant species versus another of those species. there is evidence for different differential survival on those host plant species. So I think that probably answers your question to some extent, but I don't know the details. And there are differences in vigor of larvae in terms of basically the tissue quality of the host plant. So, some of the early instars can only eat very sensitive soft tissue. So some of that's timing sensitive.
So Amy was needed to leave, but she commented that the native pepper weed was probably the plant with the highest survivorship. Bob, did you want to comment on host plants? Do you want to unmute and free discussion at this point? And then John, I know you have some questions too. You're muted, Bob. You need to unmute, Bob. Bob.
Bob.
Hey, Bob.
Unmute.
Hey, Bobarina.
Bob.
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 Sound is off.
We can't hear you, Bob. You need to
Nobody
unmute.
heard you. Don't.
Can you unmute, Bob? I don't think I can unmute him, so
He's muted.
yeah.
Down on here today.
Bob, can you hear me?
His name's there.
Okay, can you unmute down on your screen?
I think he can hear you. Maybe try the chat box instead.
Oh, okay, we can try, but I'm not sure he'll be consulting it, but I'll give that a try. There we go. Thank you. We can't hear you. Yeah, okay. Well, there's a button, there should be a button on your screen. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Can you hear me, Paulette?
I can hear you, John.
Oh,
Why don't you go ahead?
yay!
Oh, all right.
It keeps coming back on. Okay, it will not come back on again now. I killed it.
Well, it's not your microphone. It's the little button at the
I
bottom.
know
you have
that. I know.
Okay. Okay. Did you have a comment about host plants?
I certainly do. And this is the right time for it. People
Please.
wonder, Amy knows all this stuff, but people wonder why we're using primarily non-native host plants for this butterfly.
Right.
Now, in my survey that I conducted for the Park Service shortly after discovery, which was by John Fleckenstein, by the way, I discovered the first use of the native plant on the Lepidium virginicum menziesii, which I call Puget Sound peppergrass, but it's a native peppergrass down among the driftwood. And that's about the only place it grows. And Tia and I both found multiple examples of that. Meanwhile, everything else was up on the two non-native mustards, which, by the way, it was the policy of the Park Service to eradicate at that time. Very frustrating to the director of the unit that we had to say, don't eradicate them. That's where the caterpillars are for this certain to be endangered species. Okay, so the question becomes, A, why are they using the weedy mustards? And the answer to that is there are no other native mustards in the entire family on the upland grassland habitats of the park. No drabas, no nothing.
Yeah.
The thought there might have once been a native draba, but that is on Vancouver Island, but it's not there. The other question arises, why don't you use the native peppergrass up in the other habitat? Because it won't grow there. It grows only in the brackish zone down among the driftwood, where it's very subject to inundation. And certainly the caterpillars and pupae are inundated from time to time and survive that. So the populations on the peppergrass are robust, but they're very small and extremely limited in space. And this brings us to the topic we discussed 2 or 3 meetings ago about the importance of recognizing that sometimes it's non-native exotic flora that our butterflies are taking advantage of. If it had not been for the island marble making the adaptive shift over to these two mustards, it would almost certainly be extinct by this time. Now, how did it become that way? Well, lots of questions about that, but John and I have discussed it ad nauseum. And a hypothesis of mine might be, or is, ever since I first saw the larva down there, I said, oh, it's on this thing, is that it is possible that the original animal, post-glacial, was largely a beach strand limited animal. And that on Vancouver Island and the Gulf Islands, that it spread uphill with the coming of the mustards, also with white civilization, and remained down in the brackish, but not very many. So anyway, that's all we know. That feeds on the pardon me, I'm sorry, the weedy mustards that are up in the hills. They're not really hills, a couple of hills, but up on the grasslands, and it feeds down on this other. There is a pepper grass up in the grasslands, but it's a non-native type, and there's very, very little of it. So that kind of puts the fruit plants in perspective. I think Amy does have some survivorship numbers on the different plants. It's simply not practicable to use the one native plant that it uses on the wider expansive habitat. And so we find in ourselves, as you so beautifully showed us, and thank you, by the way, both of you, for splendid presentations. And you showed us so well that our main management option at this time and for the foreseeable is gardening weeds. And that's not a bad thing, because that's what's necessary here. Sorry to be irritable, I just was, that button
Oh,
was.
of course. Yeah, thank you for your comments, Bob. John, did you have some questions?
Yeah, well, actually, just some comments. I too enjoyed very much the discussion. I especially am gratified about the using of non-native food plants for protection and preservation, and in heart, what Bob said was right on. Number two was San Juan Island was perhaps more than many other places in Western Washington, subject to anthropogenic influence early because of the war. The American camp, the British camp were part of a border dispute. And so it was highly populated and farmed at a time when the rest of Western Washington was not. So the influences that destroyed a lot of the habitat actually are deeply rooted in time. Last and maybe not least is that so far genomic data, we haven't got a lot of samples, but genomic data on the island marble, that was old specimens of the island marble from Vancouver Island, seem to indicate that its closest relatives are in the Yukon and Alaska, not Eastern Washington. So that's interesting. Again, that's preliminary, but it is interesting.
Yeah.
I'm out.
Okay, any other questions? I have a question about the plan for the future. So the Fraser Homestead site, is that private land or is that federal or state or?
It is county land. There's a San Juan County Conservation Land Bank in San Juan County that owns the property. And then there's a land trust, San Juan Preservation Trust manages the property. And so they are the group that is tending to the host plants and making sure that there's habitat there.
So that bodes well. I was wondering if the plan for the future includes land acquisition or working with private land owners or focusing specifically on public land.
Well, the plan involves both public and private land. I can speak more to the private land part than I can the public land in terms of just talking about the national park. There's funding available to add more plots, and so more habitat plots. And so the next stage of expanding habitat beyond the core habitat is more of the kinds of gardening plots that you saw. So we need more of them. I mean, that's the next stage. And then after that, there's going to be at some point, there may be a different kind of agreement for landowners available. I'm not thinking of the name right now. The safe harbor agreement, which may change how some of the habitat is conserved. But that's what's going on right now. Yeah.
I can speak to that a little bit too, in the public lands context. The two are happening in parallel, private land and public lands, but of course the public land managers have their own management plans, and the cooperative agreements between U.S. Fish and Wildlife and private landowners through the CCAA program and Partners for Fish and Wildlife. That's basically the way I think in which U.S. Fish and Wildlife is ensuring that there's habitat outside of public lands. And so those landowners are boosting what might already happen, but there's sometimes differing approach between the federal land agencies. And where the national park is right now is finalizing their resource management plan. They've been gathering a lot of tribal input in the last several years to really reframe the public land management approach and try some different methods. And then San Juan Island National Monument, their resource management plan has been dead in the water for 4 years or so, waiting to be finalized. And sounds like we're in the finalization process right about now. It might be signed, then they can actually move on that. Those two federal agencies have the biggest swaths of potential land basically available for habitat. But then, with the county lands and the private lands in trust, we've got all the angles that needs to include for the federal oversight regulation aspect and the county level commitment to critical habitat and so on. And then, each individual's agency and funding.
May I say that what's extremely refreshing about both of your talks and really heartening to me is how you've taken it into the social context, both Native American and contemporary. And it is, in fact, the integration of these two species of plants, which have an old history here, as John showed us, into the wider ecology. All those nectar plants that I asked about, and then you showed, they've got to work together, and it's not ultimately going to be rows of mustards. It's going to be those plants integrated into the ecosystem, and that includes the human ecosystem. And so that takes it way beyond the simple model of gardening for weeds that it might look like now into a really complex ecological whole. And you two have presented the prospects and the possibilities for that just beautifully. So thank you very much.
I have a question or two.
Go ahead, Mark.
Have you considered using New Zealand electric fences rather than putting up wood and screen fences to keep deer out? It's easier to put up and move around and expand, and it may be cheaper. I don't know.
I think that different fencing methods have been tried in the past. I'm not sure if electric fences have been tried. Usually public lands can't do that because there's too many public access issues with electric fencing. I don't know if anyone has tried electric fencing on private land, but there's been all sorts of different attempts and styles, and they seem to all have their pros and cons. And people kind
Okay,
of
if you think of electric fence, though, the New Zealand is really a different kind of electric fence, but that I just want to make sure that you know that name. And then another thing, back in the 60s, when I used to roam around the San Juan Islands, I was hunting rabbits. San Juan Island had probably, I'm sure it was the biggest population of rabbits in the world outside of Australia, maybe. And they would just mow down the fields. I wonder what their impact was on the native plants down there in that same area.
That's a really good question. They could be a factor for extirpating any native mustards that might have been there. They certainly could. They're still extraordinarily abundant, as are the foxes that prey on them. And there's whole big areas near American Camp or part of American Camp that are simply bare soil with them.
Yeah.
On the other hand, the two plants that we're in debt to here for keeping this animal alive don't seem to be too disfavored by the rabbits, and they grow pretty close to the rabbit warrens. But you're probably right that they've had an impact in the past.
Oh yeah, there were so many rabbits that they used to, farmers would take an old car, cut it down and have an open body and then weld rods out from the poles out from the car, put seats on them. And at night you could go out with a salmon net and go flying across the fields and net 200 rabbits with no problem. You had to pay to do that. And it was the only place in Washington that allowed you to hunt after dark with a flashlight. And so you put a battery in a backpack and have a big searchlight, walk along with a pistol shooting rabbits. And it was really a different place, but boy, they would sure eat everything up. I heard that the disease wiped them out though. I have a friend in San Juan Island. I asked him if the rabbits are all gone. He said pretty much, but if as long as there's a male and a female left, he'll put his money on the rabbits.
Yeah.
They fluctuate, but they can be an impact too on the death camas, the zigodina, and on the beach verbena, and on several of those other important nectar plants. But they don't tend to impact where the turf is in reasonably good condition and dense. So again, the work you're doing to build the habitat back is all to the good in that regard. It'll help keep the rabbits where they're doing less harm to the butterfly.
I'm going to leave, but I want to leave one thing. You sure have a beautiful place to do a study. I hope we get the rabbits back. I mean, the butterflies, not the rabbits. The butterflies. We don't need any more rabbits.
Thank you, Mark. Hey, Stuart, can you unmute and ask your question or your comment, provide your comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to say regarding those rabbits eating whatever, I've been raising or growing tower mustard, Teritis glabra or Arabis glabra at Lincoln Park in West Seattle. And our eastern cottontails eat most of the flower stalks before they can flower and set seed. So they are certainly a problem for these habitat plants. I would also say that area there looks like it could be good habitat for tower mustard. And I imagine it wouldn't be a bad idea to try growing some there and see if the island marbles would use it.
Right on.
Yeah, well, these are excellent questions and thoughts, and thanks, Bob, too, for your foundational knowledge and the contributions to really our bigger picture understanding of pollinators and species adaptation. And I was thinking with the earlier comments on Lepidium and remembering a friend of mine who is Samish, where they've used Lepidium seeds as native medicine. So if you think of migration camps and canoes landing on the shoreline, sometimes there were huge settlements and a lot of people on the shoreline. So there would have been human disturbance to coastal lagoons, but the ethics and the approach to wildcrafting, if they're using Lepidium and collecting this seed, it's like a gentler interaction with our species. And with European settlement, we're using the shorelines for schooners landings and moving lime and firing at the lime kilns and big logs and moving stuff like that. And then when humans move in and settle, we put bulkheads on the beach, just the overall approach, especially as we're working with a delicate species like this, like we get the idea behind southern resident killer whales and the fact that they almost exclusively eat Chinook salmon. If we want to keep that species alive, we have to keep their food source alive. And so if this butterfly is basically saying, I want to be here, I can't always eat Lepidium, I'm going to shift to Brassica. What else might it choose exactly? And also, how do we educate people to not step on plants? A simple little thing, don't step on the plants when you walk on the beach. It's very much an ethical approach, and it's fun to work with something as small and delicate as a butterfly because you have to interact in a small and delicate way, you know?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
you're kind to say so, Sarah. Thank you very much for your kind words. It was an honor to be involved in this butterfly very early in its more modern history. But I want to say that your picture of, and when you first said the canoe culture in your slide, I thought, wow, yes. And now the picture that you draw us of the camps and using the lepidium, I mean, that will have constituted a form of lepidium agriculture, much like the Duwamish in the Maima Mounds with the camas. It will have been exploiting the pepper grass, but also encouraging it, surely, right? And so it's entirely possible that the people of whom you're speaking could have been a really big impact on the health and well-being and the broader, probably broader distribution along the shoreline than it is now. That you really opened my eyes to that. And also, Stuart's so right about the Draba. Didn't know that in the rabbits, but it makes sense. Might really suggest that Walt's got it there for knocking out the native on the uplands. But I second that wholeheartedly. If you and Walt can look into possibly sneaking some Drabas or some tower mustards into your plots, that could be a real game changer with another native.
I just want to clarify that the tower mustard is not the Draba. The tower mustard is Teritis, or formerly Arabis glabra.
Arabis, yeah. And that too, and then there is a Draba that still occurs on San Juan Island that could be a candidate also. There aren't very many potential native candidates, but there are a couple that could still be tried.
So Melanie, did you want to talk just a little bit about kind of a plan to do some volunteer work out at San Juan Island?
Yes, I realized that after announcing the trips, that I neglected to announce that one of them is to the San Juan Islands to observe the island marble butterfly, and Walt and Sarah very kindly have been working with us and are going to provide some volunteer work for us to do as part of our visit. And so I want to thank you both for that, and also for your talk tonight. Were you thinking of something? Is that what you were asking, Paulette?
Yeah, that's what I just wanted to make sure that
I know, thank you for that. Yes.
They've been talking about volunteer opportunities, and I just wanted to make it clear that you've been working with them to try to set something up for this coming year. And it seems like ideally it would be great to set up an ongoing commitment to help with the butterfly restoration work.
Would. Mm-hmm.
Be great.
Walt, I think your statement was that the actual tasks that we'll be performing will be determined later on in the season once you've figured that out.
Yeah, we still need to talk about what we're going to do exactly, but yeah, we have a general idea.
Sounds good.
Okay, are there any other questions or comments?
Could I ask a question?
Absolutely, please do, Todd.
That species of the large marble in Utah uses an invasive called Dyer's woad, or Isidis tinctoria. Is that really ever a possibility outside of the area? Because I saw a record on San Juan Island of that mustard. Would that ever be considered outside of the area as to expand the habitat?
Will you repeat the mustard name again? Just so.
Yeah, Dyer's woad, Isidis tinctoria. Other subspecies of the large marble use it.
Okay.
Austinitis and Austinitis coloradensis. And I know it's an invasive and frowned upon, but it's another non-native that might expand the distribution if you grow it outside of the critical area on San Juan Island.
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
But
by the way, folks,
really interesting thought. Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, Walt.
No.
You need to know that Todd, John said some things about him, but what I don't think has been mentioned is that Todd is the North American authority on the Anthocorina, or is it Eucoini, Todd, the marble wings and the orange tips. He's the man in all North America for it. He's the one who sorted out the Sarah and the Julia and the Stella orange tips and
Thank
all
you.
the others. He's why we say, yeah, Julia now instead of Sarah. It's just as pretty and just as nice. And Sarah's still there, just elsewhere. But Todd is the reigning authority on this entire subfamily of butterflies in North America. And so we're very and respected around the world. So we're really honored to have you, Todd. I hope you'll come back
Thank
to some
you.
of our meetings and give us a whole program on Western
that's a
orange
good
tips and
idea.
marble wings. That'd be great.
I know more about Anthocharis Sarah complex in Euclid. That's why I came here to learn about the island marble. Does Dave Nunnally, has he used woad at all in the lab? Is he still here, David Nunnally?
He's still here. Dave, can you unmute and
What was the question, Todd?
For your book on the caterpillars of Cascadia, did you use Dyer's woad at all with your subspecies of Eucliosinitas?
Not that I know of. We reared them on Erebus,
Right.
and Sicembrium, some various mustards, but not on Dyer's wood.
Okay.
Incidentally, the idea of using the tower mustard is real attractive. That's an enormous mustard.
It is.
Biomass.
It's really tall. Yeah.
So if that can be made to work, that would be a great plant.
Yeah.
And I've seen a lot of ex-Sarah orange tip, Julia orange tips, a lot of them on tower mustard, but I haven't seen the Euchloe on it.
Right.
Don't know if they.
In Utah, the spring whites and Euchloe use it, and the Anthocharis use it, and Pontia, Beckeri, and Protodus, the occidentals, they all seem to like that nasty, invasive, non-native Dyer's woad. So,
Yeah. No, I haven't tried Dyer's wood.
okay. It grows around my house, so I used it for a lot of library. When the Sarah complex would switch to it, I wouldn't have to go in the mountains and touch the Erebus so much. So thanks, Bob, for your kind words.
Heartfelt.
thank you for joining us, Todd.
Yeah, and to answer that question a little bit more too, I don't know of any plant attempts to introduce even more host plants. I haven't come across that in my reading and conversations. Walt, do you know of anything? Because that, that could be something that could be tried, but it seems that this group in this region is really sensitive around introduced species, and there's already such an effort going into minor things, sometimes like controlling the rabbits that explodes in our local community, and don't kill the rabbits. And anytime there's a balancing effect or introduction of new species, or trying to remove a species that's become naturalized, even though it's introduced, it always spurs a lot of really interesting, sometimes explosive conversations in the community here.
Let me mention that there's a second Erebus. Erebus, I think, is Scotiana. What's the English name? I'm forgetting. It's sort of a cousin of the tower mustard that could also be tried, a native to the area, that you wouldn't have that that dispute about adding another non-native, and you could try that one too.
I can say that, and this doesn't exactly get to your questions, but in terms of where the focus is right now, it's really on growing Brassica rapa in fields. And the reason for that, I think, is because of the three host plants. You can say something else in a moment, but in the fields, in the grasslands, that's the plant that does the best, is my understanding. And so, you might be able to try some of the Sicembrium, but that's typically grown in the dune habitat, at Cattle Point and other places too. But I think there's just so much concern about getting the butterflies and the eggs and the larvae what they need, that the effort so far, or the current effort, is just focused on mostly Brassica rapa And so I think I won't be surprised. I'm speculating here a little bit. I won't be surprised if other species aren't included at some point, but at this time, it's really focused on the field mustard for that reason, just to try to get habitat out there, and they know that one's successful. So, yeah, but I agree that it'd be nice to see some tower mustard and Erebus and others out there. Yeah, as well.
Well, just in research plots for now,
Yeah,
might be a long way down the road.
exactly. Yeah.
So Regina, I know you were, I hope you're still with us. I think you were doing some work out on maybe San Juan Island. I was just wondering if that was through your work.
Yes, because I work with the DNR natural areas, which is Cattle Point is one. I don't go there very often, but we were out there last fall doing some plantings. And yeah, so that's for work. I get paid. They pay my ferry fare. They pay my food. It's horrible long days to get from Olympia to Cattle Point and back. But yeah.
Regina, you said you were doing some planting. Could you
Yeah.
tell us something you were planting there?
We were planting, last time I went out, which is actually the first time I've been out since well before the pandemic for a variety of issues. So that was the first time I'd been out for a few years. But we were planting sand verbena for the sand verbena moth.
Right.
And then we were planting a couple of nectar plants. Armeria maritima was one, and I don't really remember what the other one was. And you'll just have to forgive me for that, because as I was telling Paulette and Carolyn, it was horizontal rain and about 35 degrees. And I did not get home until midnight after catching a 7:30 a.m. ferry to get out there. So some of it is just kind of blanked out, but that's what we were doing. We've also been controlling hawthorn and mowing down blackberry. And we had some test plots for trying different methods of controlling the invasive grasses enough to get the mustards to grow and the sand verbena, because we can't focus on just the island marble. We have to do everything rare that's out there, like the sand verbena moth. So it's too bad Carl Barentine's not here. He would like to hear about the sand verbena moth, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, can I ask a question to Bob? Do we have many species of butterflies on San Juan Island?
Who's speaking? Is that?
Mark Schuler?
Oh, Mark, it's Mark speaking. I said Walt earlier when I meant Mark. But do we have many species on San Juan Island?
Yes.
Well, interestingly enough, the survey that my late wife Tia and I were conducting for the Park Service was stimulated by the discovery of the island marble, but we were actually contracted to survey the entire butterfly fauna of the national parklands, both English and American camps, and that entailed looking over a lot of the island, plus amalgamating all the pre-existing records, many of which Commander Pelham had brought together, of course. And there was a woman named Susan, not Warner, something like that, on Orcas, who had compiled a list of San Juan butterflies. And so we have a pretty good idea, and a better one now. It's not a huge list, but it's something like, I think we're approaching 45 or 50 species for the county, perhaps. And that's for the tiniest county of all in land area. I have the tiniest county, Wahkiakum, in political area, but San Juan's even smaller in land. But it has a pretty high fauna. That's not bad. That's about a third of the state's fauna. Maybe it's a little less than that, but it's in the rain shadow, you see. So it gets a lot of sunshine. On the other hand, its growing season is very short because the islands desiccate so early. And you got to do much of what you're doing in the spring. Most of our valuable survey was in April, May, and a bit into June. After that, it slowed down. But we added a handful of species, and there were some historic ones. But yeah, I think we're talking about, what is it, around 40 to 50 species been recorded in the islands. Not bad, really.
Thank you.
So Dan, do you want to ask Bob?
No, I just put it in the chat. Is the name you're thinking about Susan Vernon?
Thank you very much. It certainly is. Susan's doing a list. See, I told Jeanette I couldn't think of names earlier. It's a weird name thing I'm having right now. Susan Vernon, and she has compiled a little actually pamphlet on the butterflies of San Juan Islands, or San Juan County. I don't know how long since she's revised that. We should talk with her and get it out again. Might be helpful for your public efforts that Sarah and Walt are doing out there to have such a pamphlet. Susan
Yeah.
Vernon is a good all-around naturalist.
We can reach out to Susan. I did get a fair bit of information from her when we first started the volunteer program, and she's also known for starting captive rearing efforts in her living room. So she's a key person for Island Marble.
I would have been amazed if you didn't know her.
Yeah.
And I bet she's a big admirer of yours. I would, yeah, just ask her if she would let you put out her pamphlet again, update it a little bit. That'd be great.
Yeah, I think there's also some other folks that have been working on an updated list too. So I'll ask around because I don't know if she's updated hers. And I know of a recent survey that was supposed to happen on Orcus for a specific butterfly. I can't remember which one, but I believe it was Washington State funding. If
Yeah, that's our big,
WNR, I can't.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Well, so I'll ask and see if I can find the most updated list, because it would be great to have something really recent. And
Yeah.
sometimes you dig and you realize it's not new information.
Oh, we can do that for you. Just run it past John or me, or both of us, and we'll do that for you quickly. Yeah, that butterfly they're going to survey for. Ann Potter went looking a number of times. And by the way, it was Ann Potter of Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife who instigated the Western Washington grassland surveys that took place over several summers. And she did it with John Fleckenstein, zoologist for the DNR, and other people. It was the two of them that were really looking at all of these habitats, and that's what led John Fleckenstein to coming up with the marble. But one that Anne has looked for, but this is our big mystery. Any of you could solve it, is what became of the Great Arctic on Orcas Island. We had a butterfly woman named the Butterfly Lady, Emily Henriksen. Caitlin is working on a biography of her right now. I traded butterflies with her when I was a very young man, but she lived in Sunnyside, and she provided butterflies to museums and serious researchers all over the country. And she was the butterfly woman. Well, she lived on Orcas for a while and came up with a county record, which I just recently found in one of her old boxes that have all gone to OSU now, of the moss elfin. And she had a number of county records for San Juans in the 1940s and early 50s. But she found fairly abundantly up on Mount Constitution the Great Arctic, or Nevada Arctic, or the Great Grayling, Aeneas nevadensis gigas. And that's, that many of you will know the Great Arctic. It's pretty big, beautiful, tawny, mountain lion colored butterfly that flies in even years, primarily in the Cascades. But there's this one population on Orcas, and nobody has seen it there for sure since 1955. So go find it.
So Cheryl, you were holding up a book. Can you hold it up again and comment on it? It might be of interest, especially if people are going to go out and volunteer at San Juan Island. It may be of interest to prepare for it.
Yeah, this is Susan's book, Rain Shadow World. And I could probably look it up on the web and put it in the chat, but a naturalist year in the San Juan Islands. And as it would happen, I happened to run into her while I was helping with a release last year with the island marble. And after the national park folks left, I just went wandering down by the beach, and I had my binoculars, and I looked like a, something that was interested in looking around and finding things. And she was combing the beach, looking for sand verbena and looking for the snails, because she was worried about the snails eating the host plant for another butterfly, and so then she told me some of her history with working with the island marble. And anyway, it was great to meet her. And if y'all have an opportunity to go on the field trip, it's really worth a visit. And Trent was excellent. They met me out on the road there, and we went and released the 3 island marbles in the dunes that day. And part of the reason they go down in the dunes is I think it has to be like less than 10 miles an hour wind, or they can't release for that day, because otherwise the butterflies don't have a very good chance. So we kind of snuck down in the dunes and got to do that. And it was really fun. It took 45 minutes for this one little butterfly that was clinging on to, and it was the fiddleneck. I think is one of the plants that you had Walt had in his slides. And so that was the plant that he put it onto, because it was a little more substantive to cling on there. And it just sat, and I waited with it until it finally opened its wings and I could get a picture of the dorsal surface before it finally flew away. So very, very fun.
Very nice. The fiddleneck is one of their favorite nectar plants, and it's the primary nectar plant for the ones on the beach on the peppergrass. In fact, the first when I was lucky enough to spot the caterpillar on the lepidium, it was because I'd seen an adult on the fiddlehead or the fiddleneck. And it's just this lagoon is just downhill from what's it called, the Pinnacle at the top of American Camp, right in the middle of that classic habitat. It's just a short walk downhill, about a half a mile or so, to the lagoon where the other thing lives. And I thought it was just one that flew down there and found some fiddleneck. It might have been, but then lo and behold, Tia was always the person to see everything good first, because she was the most observant person in the history of humankind. And I'm not, but I spotted this one before her, which is my one true distinction. And it was because of the fiddleneck. It's a great nectar plant for that butterfly.
Thank you, Cheryl, for sharing that experience that you had, and for putting the book title in the chat.
No kidding.
How did you get hooked up with Trent, was it, to release the butterflies?
My sister wanted to come for a visit, and she said, I want to go to San Juan Island. And I said, okay, I've never been. So last spring, when they came out for a visit, I met her there for 3 days, and we went to the American camp, and it was too early. It was April, and it was really chilly, and I saw all of the signs for the island marble, and I knew that it was there. But I ran into a park person that said, oh, well, we released these in the spring, and maybe you could come back again. And said, well, okay. So she sent me, or I gave her my contact info, and Trent followed up. And I think it was, there were 2 of us that went out that day, working, or Trent and another park service person. So I wasn't with them very long, but I got a little bit of the history. I know of the rearing program, that I didn't realize it had changed responsibility. So that was interesting to hear from your presentation, that who is responsible for the rearing program is kind of in flux a little bit. So very nice presentation. I enjoyed it.
Okay, any other comments, questions? All right, well, thank you so much for spending so much additional time with us, Walt and Sarah, and for giving such wonderful presentations. We really appreciate your being with us tonight, and we look forward to meeting you, at least some of us, as the year progresses, and maybe in future years as well, to help you with the restoration effort.
You're welcome. Thank you for having us and for being passionate people who've pursued all the information that we need now critically to do the continued work. So it's been lovely.
Okay, thank you so much. Have a good evening, everyone, and we'll see you next month, 1st of March. Still working on the presentation, but we'll have something for you. Okay, thanks a lot. Good night, everybody.
Great to meet you all. Great to see you.
Walt, could I ask you a quick question before you go? So I heard back from Trent that about a date. Will that date work for you also?
I think so. I have it. I was going to email you back, and because I saw his email come through, I was kind of waiting on Trent because I thought he might have more constraints on that date than I do. Let me look at it and I'll get back to you, but I think it will.
Perfect.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
He said either time period would work. So.
Okay. Yeah. Whatever he said, I'm sure it's fine. So, but I'll confirm. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, everybody. I'm going to end the meeting now. See you next month. Bye.